We are good.
All right. Chapter 2, Designing Great Starts. Most new leaders fail, actually. New leaders, they try to prove themselves early on with a quick win. But there are 5 common traps that people fall into when onboarding. And as a cautionary tale, about 60% of new leaders fall into at least one of these. The big one is focusing too heavily on the details. This trait is most common. It's where leaders embrace the minutia and the details of things that aren't relevant. Super common, it happens. Another one is reacting negatively to criticism. This usually happens with like low performers or people who don't understand how to process feedback. Intimidation is the third. Typically when new leaders are insecure about their role, or on the other end, they're convinced of their rock star status, they intimidate a little bit. Another one is jumping to conclusions. This happens because of lack of a strategic objective. And lastly, micromanaging. That's when leaders get too hands-on with the direct reports. Usually this is triggered by a lack of understanding or trust and respect. Now, these are the common things. If you want to dig deeper into this, there's a guy named Mark Van Buren. It's called the Quick Wins Paradox, which does a deeper dive into this research. It's really fascinating. Now, those are the most common traps to avoid while onboarding. Those traps happen because of 3 types of derailing behavior: emotionally unintelligent, lack of critical thinking, or lack of accountability. Emotionally unintelligent, that's your micromanaging, you're reacting negatively to criticism and intimidation. It's also people who are manipulative, people who are quick to dismiss or seeking to gain at others' expense, or failure to recognize the contributions of others. The next one is lack of critical thinking. That's the focusing too much on the details or jumping to conclusions. As well, it's being easily influenced by others or not sharing relevant information. Lack of accountability. That's not taking responsibility, that's abdication of ownership, or not being aligned to the mission and vision and values of the organization. The one I want you to really be aware of is failure to recognize the contributions of others. This one's important. Your success as a leader drops 32% when you do this. I've seen people managed out of organizations because of this, so just be aware of that. Now, in order to sidestep these traps and derailing behavior, this is where humility and self-awareness are important. They're good leadership traits to have. Be aware of the uncertainty of onboarding, how it affects the team and the anxiety it may create. Don't make it about you. It's not about you. It never is. It's about the collective well-being of the team. Enlist the team in the overall success. People will support what they're part of. And, your team's fingerprints should be clearly visible on the final work. Be aware of what you don't know. Actively seek the team's guidance. Learn about your team as people, what they're good at, the potential gaps, the motivations, the interpersonal dynamics, all of those things. So, building and establishing trust. We talked about first impressions a bit in the Masterclass and the videos on the channel if you want to revisit it. But building on that, when people meet you for the first time, they are forming their opinions of you probably in the first conversation. Mentally, they need to answer a few questions about you. There are 3 of them. The big one is, can I trust you? Do I feel like you have my back? Is your behavior consistent? The next one is, can I respect you? Are you competent? Can you do the job? Are you transparent? Are you inclusive? Will you treat me with courtesy and kindness? And the third one is do you care for me? Do I feel psychologically safe with you? Is it okay to take calculated risks and not get fired? Will I get punished if I speak my mind? Or if I respectfully push back, will there be retribution? Psychological safety is actually a pretty key aspect to building high-performing teams. Now, I'm going to hand-wave this a little bit because high-performing teams is probably a masterclass in and of itself. But I do want to talk about demonstrating trust. I will shout out, though, Amy Cuddy, who's a social psychologist and a thought leader in this space. Her work is really good. And I recently discovered a Professor Amy Edmondson who does really smart work in organizational behavior. So if any high performers in the audience want a stretch assignment, it's really good material. So demonstrating trust. As you're in the forming stages of your team development, there are a couple immediate things you can do to demonstrate trust. We already talked about relationship building. Also, listen and get to know your colleagues as friends and people. respect the boundary, but like you want to get to know them. Something else you could do, ask for help. Get that from your team. Admit when you don't know things or when you made a mistake. You know, if you're in a big group, raise your hand on a project instead of being chosen. You can also use your expertise to contribute to a colleague's challenge that they're working through. Freely share your knowledge in your network. Like, that's a big one for me. And some traits that are super simple to demonstrate, just follow up on things. Address issues quickly. Be approachable. Be empathetic to your team's emotional state. Support your team members equally as you do your high performers. Okay? So this feels like a good place to level set. Let's take a quick pause.
Okay. As a design leader, I'm finding it challenging to change my own mental model that my day-to-day value is no longer coming from the thing that I design or produce, but that it's being the supporter. Any advice to help that mental transition? I would love to hear not only Andrew's take on that, but I know I'm just looking at the attendee list. I
Yeah.
know there's some people in here that have really done that switch. So if you could even offer some advice on this particular one, because I'm not sure if there's a right answer, but probably just like winning tactics.
Okay.
I'd love to share those at the end too. So if anybody has some advice on like switching that mental model of like, hey, I got a lot of reward out of making things and showing them to everybody, to now like my team is my deliverable. How did you start coping with that, and how did you adjust? Would love to hear some feedback in the chat, and I'll read that at the end.
That's an awesome question. And I feel like I did my homework really well about this, because I'm going to talk about a tactic that I use to address that in the cognitive behavioral psychology section. So awesome. I feel like we're doing good things here. The short answer to that is you have to identify the thing that made you happy, and you have to put that in another place. And you have to go through that. So instead of building a great website, you have to change your mental model to, all right, now I'm building great teams. And that's a super high level way of addressing that problem. It's something that I went through when I was at GE, and I had to find new ways of making myself happy because I wasn't as hands-on as I used to be. But the mental model that I use was this cognitive behavioral technique that I'll talk about at the end.
Cool. And as a time check, we've got 27 minutes. We should be halfway through. If we aren't, we'll have to make some tough decisions on.
All right.
We can get
I'll try to speak quicker.